In this lesson, we're going to discuss several common issues with motherboards, CPUs, and system memory. We can't possibly cover every possible issue in this lesson. Instead, we're going to focus on several of the more common issues and their causes. Let's begin by reviewing common power issues that can affect system motherboards. Power supplies wear out over time, especially if they're overheated or overstressed. If the power supply can't deliver the DC electricity that the system needs, it may exhibit one of several behaviors. It may unexpectedly shut down, it may continuously reboot, or it may not power on at all. Remember, pin 8 on the power supply connector connects to the power good wire on the motherboard. If power disappears off that wire, the motherboard shuts down. If power quickly reappears on that wire, the system may attempt to come back on by itself, which causes the symptom of continual reboots. If it doesn't, then the system will just shut off. It's also possible that a bad power supply cannot provide enough voltage on this wire for the system to even boot at all. This results in the failure to power on symptom. You need to verify that it is truly the power supply that is causing the problem. Test the power supply and determine whether or not the power supply is providing enough voltage for the system to power on. Turn the power supply on and then test the voltage being supplied on either a motherboard connector or on a hard disk connector. For example, anything less than about 11 volts on a 12-volt wire indicates the power supply is failing. If this is the case, purchase a new power supply, remove the old power supply from the system, mount the new one, plug it in, and that should fix the power issues that you're having. When troubleshooting the motherboard, CPU, and memory issues, there may be times when you have to deal with boot error codes. Every time the PC boots, it runs a power on self-test, or a POST. POST checks to make sure that all of the basic hardware in your system is present and functioning at boot time, such as the system memory, keyboard, CPU, chipset, and so on. If it finds a problem during POST, an error is registered. How this error is reported depends on the motherboard manufacturer. Several different methods have been used over the years: audible beeps, numeric codes, and error messages. Error messages displayed on the screen are much easier to diagnose than more cryptic error code numbers or beep codes. If you have a system that's using beep codes, you're going to have to research to determine what they mean. For example, you find that 3 beeps, 2 beeps, and then 4 beeps indicates a keyboard failure. The actual codes used will vary, so check the motherboard documentation on the manufacturer's website. Instead of beep codes, some manufacturers may display an error code on the screen. These codes vary by manufacturer, just like beep codes. If you see an error code displayed on the screen after POST, you need to go to the motherboard manufacturer's website to find out what that particular code means. For example, a 201 error may indicate a memory problem, while a 301 error indicates that the keyboard did not respond correctly. Sometimes a computer system may experience problems, such as a malfunctioning video adapter, that can prevent you from seeing error codes displayed during POST. If this is the case, you can use a POST card to access the POST error codes. A POST card is an expansion board that you insert into an expansion slot. Some POST cards also include a USB interface that allows you to connect them to computers that don't have expansion slots, like a notebook system. Most models provide an LED display to report any error codes generated during POST. If the fans in the power supply start, but no power reaches the other devices and the system doesn't enter POST, it's possible that you have a problem with distended capacitors. Inspect the various capacitors on the motherboard. If you see that any are swollen on top or are leaking brown liquid, that means you've got blown capacitors and you're going to have to replace the motherboard. Another common problem is one where the system loses time or you lose your settings out of the BIOS or UEFI. For example, you may power on the system and see that the date and time are wrong and that the system has defaulted to the factory default settings. To troubleshoot this problem, you need to remember that constant power is required to store the settings that you configure in your BIOS or UEFI. The motherboard also needs constant power to keep the system clock running. If the power to the BIOS or UEFI is interrupted, then all settings are lost and the system resorts to the default factory settings. It may also cause the real-time clock to reset to a date and time many years in the past. If this happens, then it's likely that your motherboard battery has gone bad and it needs to be replaced. Now, let's talk about system overheating. In a modern system, the system components generate a lot of heat that needs to be dissipated. Overheating causes premature component failure. Overheating could be caused by a variety of different factors. Inadequate airflow may be the result of having an inadequate number or size of fans in the system. You can add extra fans to the system to increase airflow. Improperly installed fans can affect airflow. All fans must be oriented to force air through the system in the same direction. You can change the direction of the airflow by flipping a fan 180 degrees. Failing fans push less air than a properly functioning fan. You can easily identify a failing fan by the screeching noise they commonly make. This can be fixed by simply replacing the failing fan. Excessive dust within the system can block airflow and cause overheating. You can use compressed air or an anti-static vacuum to remove dust buildup. Environmental issues can also cause problems. If the air temperature outside the computer is already overly warm, then the temperature inside will be overly warm too. You should implement a proper HVAC system in your work area to remove excess heat from the environment. As a PC technician, you need to monitor the internal temperatures of your systems. Most motherboards include one or more sensors that you can use to monitor the temperature. Usually, you can view the current temperature within the BIOS or UEFI setup. There are also several software applications available that can monitor temperature as well. These tools can pull the current temperature value from the sensors and display it on the screen. Unlike using the BIOS or UEFI utility, these tools allow you to dynamically monitor the temperature as the system is being used. Most motherboards include a thermal shutdown feature. If the system gets too hot, the thermal shutdown feature immediately shuts the system down to prevent permanent damage. However, it usually doesn't do so cleanly, and there is a risk of data corruption as a result. Another common problem that can happen is intermittent device failure. This happens when a device in the system just stops working from time to time. This usually indicates that the device itself is failing. The best remedy is just to replace the failing device. At some point in the future, the flaky component will fail completely. Therefore, it's better to just replace it immediately. However, it is possible that an intermittent failure is being caused not by a failure in the device itself, but by the device driver that's used by the CPU to communicate with that device. Device drivers are just software, and occasionally they have bugs. Before you replace a device experiencing intermittent failures, you should first verify that the latest drivers have been loaded for that device. Sometimes downloading the latest driver and installing it will solve the problem. If it doesn't, then go ahead and replace the device itself. Let's end this lesson by discussing what to do in the event of smoke or a burning smell. Both of these symptoms indicate that electricity in the system isn't flowing in the correct paths and it's going somewhere it's not supposed to go. If you see or smell smoke, shut the system off immediately. There's a variety of issues that could cause this issue. It could be caused by a connector that isn't seated all the way and the electricity is arcing between the two ends. It could be caused by a short circuit in the printed circuit board of the motherboard itself or on an expansion board. Unfortunately, if you see or smell smoke, it's usually too late. It's unlikely that the components that were affected will ever work properly again and will need to be replaced. In this lesson, we talked about common issues with motherboards, CPUs, and RAM. We talked about power issues, BIOS or UEFI issues, cooling issues, and intermittent device failures.